And we're live.
Hey, buddy. How you doing? Fighting the internet over
Good man.
there.
Oh, I'm deep in a war with the internet in California here. So
Yeah. It's not exactly the backwoods, but I guess, yeah, it's all relative, isn't it? It's funny. I spoke to some aggregators based
mhm.
in Berlin the other day. He would have thought would have amazing internet, and it was terrible. It's just one of those things. So fingers crossed we're going to be able to talk about today's topic because I'm really excited. I think it's building a shared vision with your team. Great topic. Not often talked about. People are talking about the mechanics of hiring, but this is one of those missed pieces, I think. So really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I totally agree. Once we started to dig into this topic a little bit, I thought, oh, it's so rich. There's
Mm,
just so much here for us to work on
yeah.
as e-commerce executives and team leaders. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well. So, if you're joining with us live, hello, hello, and grateful to have you jump in with us here live. We'll be doing a briefer conversation today because my internet might not hold up, but we're going to really give you some tips and tricks about effective team leadership and creating a shared vision. And so, hopefully, you'll hang in here with us for the episode as we kick it off and go through it. Michael, are we ready to jump into this?
Yeah, let's
Ready to
do
rock
this
and
thing.
roll?
Let's
Okay.
make sure we maximize whatever the internet will give us to get that value across.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to give us the formal start here, and we'll get into it. You ready?
Let's do it.
If you want to scale up your e-commerce business, you're going to need to create a team, and that means you need to create a shared vision. In this episode, we're going to break down and discuss the best team building collaborative efforts we know of, and going to bring a lot of enthusiasm and energy to this topic, I think, together here today. So, Michael, are you ready to jump into how to create a shared vision with your team as a conversation?
Absolutely. And I love this phrase, which is your phrase. I literally just hired a new team member 2 days ago. So it's right at the top of my mind. So great topic for me personally, and hopefully for lots of people listening as well. So let's start with a really obvious question. How are you defining team member? Important point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fluid space now, isn't it, compared to the olden days of 9 to 5 careers? I think the way I look at it is a team member is anyone you need to accomplish business with. And that could mean they're full-time workers. It could mean they're part-time people. So those in the US, those would be, W-2 employees that are literally on your payroll. But it could also mean people who are contractors that you pay through 1099. It could mean international service providers that you don't even have a 1099, in the US contract relationship with. It could also mean even more informal relationships like service providers that are doing things for you, like ad management, that kind of thing. And even people who are business partners. Michael, as I was doing this, I was realizing, we're team members. We need to create a shared vision together, don't we? Even for this podcast. So I brought broadly, think about this stuff with all of those contexts in mind. That's just how I approach it. What are your thoughts on that part?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that broader set of people because I've been thinking of it slightly narrower than that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you and I did literally sit down and create the shared vision with quite a lot of thought before we even created the first podcast episode. And I'm really glad we did because I think it does make a difference. I would say the word team member is really important. So with a dispersed team or an international team, which is what I have, there is a real danger with the word virtual assistant. First of all, they're not virtual; they're actual, real people with real physical lives and internet issues and children and what have you. And the second thing is, out of sight, out of mind is the danger with that. It's too easy to think of a VA as, oh, just get it off your task list and give it to a VA, kind of out of sight, out of mind, off my plate. But I think team member reminds you to treat them as part of a shared mission, exactly like the word shared vision says. So that's
Yeah.
I'm glad you also agree with that language as well.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, you have to look at this really broadly these days. Very few of us have an old school structured company where we just have all of our employees that are right there together. Most of us work in collaboration with people in very dynamic situations, and it really makes our job harder as the leader to figure out how do we best manage the vision and execute on a strategy together with a group. And so this is the critical nature of this topic, and so I'm excited about some tips and tricks that we can share, some ideas. We could also share horror stories. I, and I wrote a little email I sent out to our newsletter group this morning, And I said in it I was going to share a horror story, and can I be really transparent? I
Please.
was going to share a story of when something went bad recently, and then I was in listening to some preparatory stuff. I listened to John Maxwell and podcast on the fatal flaws of leaders, and one of the things he really stressed was trust. And so I said to myself, if I tell that story even without mentioning the person's name, it's going to cast me as someone who tells stories about other people. And candidly, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to retract my offer of sharing a horror story today. I don't know if you have horror stories generally that you want to share, but there are so many times when teamwork and collaboration can go badly,
Yes.
that it is fun and sometimes easy to share anonymized stories. But I'll
I
refrain
like your
from doing that today.
integrity. I like your integrity about that. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. There's sometimes you tell a story about somebody, and I've done that, talked about a client even on this podcast. And I didn't think what I was saying was disrespectful, but he did email back and say, like, I know who you're talking about. So I think it is important to be careful of people's feelings. So that speaks well to your trust building and how respectful you are. I've got a couple of horror stories to share about people who aren't on my team because their hiring interviews were horrible. Nothing major, but I got a little bit of stuff to share. But one little point, and before we plunge into how to do this, I just want to make a simple point. I think it's really, really important to have a shared vision if you're working remotely or in a dispersed team, because you can probably get away a little bit more with not having a shared vision if you just turn up in an office every day in a routine way. You physically see each other, you have some kind of basic interaction on a human level. But if you're dispersed, you need to, I think, have to make much more conscious effort to have a shared vision. What are your thoughts on that? Just before we plunge into the how.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's our job as the leaders of our business to ensure that everyone we work with has a clarity of what we're trying to achieve together, and for any of those categories of partner. And so it absolutely is required. Now, if you're a coworker with somebody and your peers, then I guess it's a shared vision that you're rallying around inside the business you work in. But most of us are solopreneurs or working in entrepreneurial ventures where it's really on us as the leader to sort of create this vision with other people, and we have to do that gracefully and respectfully. Yeah.
Great. So the obvious next question is, how do you go about it then? What are the first steps to do that?
Yeah. I think in today's world, one of the first thing that's super important is just the foundational questions of shared vision of working together. And I think there are a few set of common questions that we all ask when we go into a deal with someone, whether it's a formal, employment relationship, which I mean, most entrepreneurs aren't interested in being employees. So, but when someone's working for you, I think there's a set of questions that we're all asking of each other, which is, am I an ethical person, and are you an ethical person? These are just foundational, am I going to do what I said I would do, and are you going to do what you said you would do? So performance and outcome. Am I a performer in the way that I'm saying I am, and are you a performer in the way you're saying you are? Another one is, am I going to treat you with respect and professionalism? Are you going to treat me with respect and professionalism? These are not really shared visions; they're just shared agreements, almost at a sort of a business level, where we'd say we want to work with people who are uh, people we can really click with and get along with. And sadly, you sometimes find people who are acting in a space and they haven't learned the basics of professionalism. They haven't learned the basics of saying, yes, I'm trustworthy and I expect you to be trustworthy, and let's demonstrate that to each other. So, those are sort of, to me, sort of just the foundations of working with people. And sadly, sometimes when you work with people, these things are the ones that you're like, oh, I found out you're not an ethical person. Bye bye. Or, oh, I found out you don't do what you say you were going to do.
Mm,
um, and or that kind of thing, or you're going to treat me not professionally.
mm,
And maybe you grew up working at a blue collar job where there was no expectation of migrated into e-commerce or online work, and you built a business, and yet you don't have an expectation of professionalism clearly rooted in your mind. So I think these are just foundational ideas that we all need to sort of work through, and we all end up working through them in our own way.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all with these. I think it's a great list of sort of checkpoints. I guess my question, and this is the for me the intriguing dynamic between humans, like how do you actually find the real answers for these? I guess you could ask directly, or is it only from experience that you really know the answers to these sort of behavior, character type questions?
Oh, it's only from experience, I think. I mean, I think you can do your best to vet people. You can do your best to have filters and screens, you know, kind of the pre-agreement level due diligence, you could call it, or diligence. That in a traditional role, that's the, you know, recruiting and you know, interview process, and verifying people's you know, prior experiences. I think those elements are traditional, but many times now we bypass those things because we're in this service provider kind of economy, gig economy. It was like, oh, you did this? Okay, I need that done. Okay, great. Let's go. Let's do it. Well, you know, when you don't vet people and verify and that kind of thing, I think you can end up making rash decisions that didn't need to be made. But I think ultimately it comes down to the proof is when you work with somebody, you begin to learn these things. I think it was in the Matrix when the Neo has to fight that kung fu master guy, this small guy who's like really awesome,
Yeah.
and then they're fighting before he goes to see the Oracle, and then he was like the kung fu guy says, um, "I had to be sure that you were the one," and then Neo said, "You could have just asked," and he said, "No, you don't really know someone until you fight them," something like that. You know,
Yeah,
it's
that
kind of like that, I guess, right? So
yeah, I guess you don't really know until you work with somebody. I think that's true. I mean, I like this morning I was working as a musician, which I still do bits and pieces of. And yeah, when you're working as a musician, there's a choir conductor just waving, and you can't sort of shout instructions to each other when you be interrupting the music. So you look at each other's eyes, and the guy twitches his hand, and then you play, and he kind of stares at you, but you think, oh, that wasn't what he meant. And in other words, you only really know how good they are when you're actually doing the thing. And I agree with
yeah,
that. And that's my
yeah,
experience. I would say that. Essential keeping the word team very very broad in definition, and which makes
mhm,
sense to me, that I guess you would apply different levels of expectation and proof, wouldn't you, if you're trying to hire somebody full time, as I did the other day, in
yeah.
advance of committing to paying them and them committing to being with me for a while, that and hopefully a long time, that's a different level of proof from if I go on Fiverr and I want to find somebody who can, you know, clean up some photos for me or add some graphic elements or something, then I would
Certainly.
probably put a lower level of proof. Although I suppose I would basically treat that as an audition instead of interviewing
Yeah.
them and say, great, do this thing. And if they don't do the thing, or they say you can do it for Tuesday and it turns up a week
Mhm.
late,
Yeah.
then I guess they've behaved themselves into truth, right? They show me what they're really like.
That's right. And there are a lot of ways to vet people kind of incrementally, you know, especially with team members, you know, from the Philippines. We're going through a process right now where we're adding a new team member. Our team leader for our team in the Philippines set up the job posting on Online Jobs PH. Then I think she's gone through 182 resumes, she told me, had it boiled down to a dozen, and then her and our team are going to interview down to just two finalists, and then I'm going to do the final chit chat with the two finalists or video call, and then give the team my opinion. But I'll be an equal voice in their opinion. Hopefully, we'll all be on the same page about who our finalist would be, and even then, that person will be on a 90-day test, in essence, probationary period, before we go forward with them on a full-time way, which means in our system they get benefits and a few different, you know, perks of being a full-time regular team member. And so that's the process we use, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, you're right. You certainly can test, you know, over time, and the 90-day filter is a great way to do that. Just, you know, it's a 90-day probationary period, and after 90 days, you're in essence a full team member,
Hmm.
and then you're treated differently. And it's really just I think, an expectation on the front end to say to people what can they expect from us if things aren't going well,
Hmm.
and how will we behave? Will we be passive aggressive and not say anything, or will we address the issues professionally and give them time to
Hmm.
course correct? You know, those kinds of things are really important. Well, anyway, so this is more about hiring, I guess, at this point than it is shared vision, but it's very interesting stuff to work through.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
guess that the interesting thing then is, And I'm going to talk about how we deal with things when they go wrong in a sec. But also, before you hire and during the hiring process, presumably you want to have some kind of vision and you want to communicate that. So how do you go about creating the vision internally, and then how do you go about communicating that to candidates for
Yeah,
roles?
yeah. I think what I've found over time is it's, the right you put people in at the beginning is one they'll stay in for a long time. So if you orient them to your business properly with a clear vision that you've explained to them, it's so much better than if you've muddled your way through who you are and what you do, which I've done. And then later they come back and like, wait, this is what kind of company? I thought you did this. I'm like, oh, I do that too, but I kind of also do this. And you what I realized over time, if I'm unclear in terms of sharing the origin story and the focus of our company or business or the work, then it creates this permanent, kind of confusion in their mind. And so I think being very clear upfront about the way in which you explain your business to people is really important, and it shouldn't be glossed over or kind of just quickly breezed past it. We can do a disservice to our team members that are joining us by being flippant about the who we are and what we do. And we do that sometimes because we think, oh, they're just a part-time person, or they're just a short-term contractor, or they're just a whatever. That's minimizing their importance to you in your mind, and that's a really big mistake. If you need somebody to execute effectively to create a good outcome, you owe it to them to orient them well to your operation.
Yeah, some great thoughts there. I really like that. I think that it's a little bit when people introduce themselves in a group, they tend to mumble their name really quickly. And actually, that's the thing I don't know. You just because you've heard it 100,000 million times in your life, I don't know it yet. And it's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? Sometimes we think, well, this is just standard to me, but it isn't to them. And as you say, yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed with really good freelancers, even if they're coming in, for example, somebody came in to do some packaging work for a physical product I was creating years ago, private labeling. And she asked a ton of questions about the brand, some of which I didn't know the answers to, but it forced me to go away and think. And that was an example of somebody managing upwards, if you like, doing that same thing the other way around and saying, I want to know about you and what you stand for. Now, when you're doing branding work, that's core of the work. But for any type of work, I thought that was a very intelligent and, optimistic. I was pleased to hear them asking that kind of question. And I think the other thing, I've got a couple of kind of horror stories. I remember the first ever interview I did a couple of years ago to my first full-time hire of a VA or a team member, I should say, in the Philippines. And I was all over the shop with how I explained the company. And it was
Mhm.
such a mess. And that was really useful for me because they turned out to be a pretty disastrous candidate anyway. And it was just good use to get it out of my system. And then I thought, wow, I really do need to sit down and really mindfully write down, articulate what do we do, who do we serve, and to be very, very clear. And it's surprisingly easy to fall into that trap in my experience.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree.
So we talked about then obviously finding the right people, doing your best to articulate your vision. You've talked about quite a rigorous hiring process that your team's going through. Um, and then we've got to deal with the reality. Sometimes things don't work out. So you've got those
Yeah.
characteristics, ethical, people doing what they said they're going to do, mutual respect, professional behavior. So how do we handle it when it doesn't quite go to plan then?
Yeah, I think you've got a big decision. In baseball terms, we'd call it the fielder's choice. You've got to decide whether you're going to address the issue directly, or you're going to just graciously retract yourself and your business from the collaboration with that person. And those are hard decisions to make. And I would say it really depends on the situation and whether you feel like there's um, maybe some value in being forthright and direct about what the specific issue is. And again, my heart and mind would always be to say, if you haven't actually addressed the issue, maybe they don't know. Maybe you've got a scenario in which you can salvage the deal if you're forthright about it. But if you're not forthright and direct about it in a professional way, for whatever reason, maybe you just realize, hey, this is how somebody works. This is their deal. I didn't realize it. Then you've got the choice of just saying, thanks a lot. Really appreciate your time. We're going to end it at the end of the month, or whatever it is, whatever the appropriate deal duration is. And I think there's fairness there. Um, and I would just caution people, you never want to end things badly, and you want to think through how you're doing it, especially if you have assumptions that you make, or you just never know what somebody's circumstance is, especially if you make assumptions about something that you thought they were going to be doing but they didn't do it, but then you know then you find out, oh, they didn't ever know that was the expectation, or I didn't communicate clearly, or all these scenarios can happen where it's actually you. You're the one, you're the problem, not
Yeah.
them. And in humility, you have to be willing to say to yourself, maybe I'm the problem here, maybe I didn't uh, find the right person, set the stage properly, communicate effectively. And so I think humility a little bit is important there, in that
Yeah.
regard.
I
So
I agree with you. It's and we both expressed before that we don't particularly necessarily think of ourselves as amazing managers. I certainly started off with sort of managing people remotely, the feeling that I was quite good, and I certainly, I think, got to the point where I recognized I was like a D minus or E plus level manager, and I'm now working my way to being a C plus and better over time. And I think humility is the only way you're going to grow. The other thing I'd like to say is in a certain kind of way, and I hope this isn't too shocking a concept, but in if we're entrepreneurs and therefore kind of very responsible and very much in charge, two sides of the same coin, if we've got a bad hire, we're kind of responsible for that because we didn't find, vet, or otherwise manage things such that we got the right
that's
person,
right.
right? And that, I think it's
Yeah.
good to take responsibility
Yeah.
because my default setting is just like my wife, both quick, bright people like yourself, and it's easy to say, and you're much more patient and kind than me. I have to remind myself, like Mike, very likely you said something once or you didn't say it at all clearly, and you expected
Hmm.
them to mind read because that's very probable that I acted in that way. And
Yeah.
therefore, I need to look at my communications and think, okay, so I probably did, knowing me, I probably told them the 10% of things they really, really needed to know that was very important to me. And then I told them 90 other things which weren't so
Hmm.
important, but I didn't tell them which was important.
Hmm.
So, it's one of those things, isn't it? As you say, humility is a great word. You learn over time,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a sad business sometimes when you realize how much work there is to do on yourself.
Well, yes, and you also realize your own deficiencies and inabilities, but then you see them in other people too, and this is reality, and you just have to figure out, okay, is there an ability to work with this person even though they maybe didn't, you know, execute in the way I expected them to, or that kind of thing. Those are the hardest choices. In the olden days, when I used to be in human resources, I would always say to managers who wanted to fire somebody, the hardest person to fire was the wonderful person socially and in the team dynamic who was not executing on the duties of their job. Those are the hardest people to fire. Sometimes it's easy to fire people who you feel like are a jerk. But so that's the tricky part, is where's the relationship going? Are they a great person that's not executing, or are they a great person and they're executing okay? But I have to decide, what then do you do? And these are hard choices. So there you go.
Yeah, and as you said, you're not wrong to say you should always do it graciously. I mean, the world's quite small that we're in. If you're working in partnerships, particularly like in the e-commerce world, there's only so many people to go around, so you definitely don't want to get a reputation. But apart from that, it's just a human thing to remember that it sucks to get fired or let go from a contract, and you just got to remember that, right? Okay, so that's the downside when it doesn't work. But how do we get to the higher level visionary part of this shared vision then, the more inspiring bit, if you like?
Are you ready? I have an acronym for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to call this my Slima model. Slima. Slima. I think that might catch on. This might really be a New York Times bestselling acronym that takes over time. There's SMART goals, and there's whatever, all kinds, SWOT analysis, and
So
now
we're
there
gonna
might
have
be
slimy
Slima.
goals. Slimy goals
Slima.
for this. Yeah, okay. Tell me what this acronym stands for then.
Okay, yeah. With that build up, I think you've got to have a shared vision that, you communicate with people that have a few attributes, and so here they are. So this is the Slima. The first thing is they need to be strategic. You want to create a shared vision with people that they see as strategic. Like, if you've got a shared vision, um, then they're going to see it and think, yes, this makes good sense. People won't follow a crazy plan. And so you've got to be strategic about what you're sharing. The second thing is logical. It has to make logical sense to them to execute on. The third thing is inspiring. It's got to be something that really motivates and that we can rally around. And the next one is it's got to be mutually beneficial. Having the shared vision that you help me get rich is not a good mutually beneficial shared vision, is it? And then the final thing is it's got to be achievable. It's got to be a shared vision that people can achieve. And the precursor to all of this is the best way to get at this, the very best kind of approach to all of this is the best uh, vision is co-created. If you co-create a vision with somebody, then it's theirs as much as it is yours. And I think it's a really, really under considered business, objectives and planning thought. Co-creating with somebody where you can both execute on something is, even if it's not your complete perfect vision that you personally had in your mind, is going to be infinitely stronger. Whatever that metaphor is, where they have two horses, where like one horse can pull, like, I don't even know what it is, like 1,000 pounds or a pound, or I don't even know what it is. But then two horses put together like 64 times exponentially stronger. And so the co-created vision, in my view, is the gold standard to achieve and to get to. And if you can buy into it and the other person buys into it, you've got something very, very powerful that you'll then build together.
Yeah, I really like this. I mean, the first thing to say is it sounds kind of obvious. It's almost a cliche these days. Tom Peters said in Search of Excellence, which was, I guess, based on companies in the 80s, right? Or certainly early 90s at the latest. He said, no involvement, no commitment. I remember underlining this and asterisking it because he said, underline this and asterisk it. No involvement, no commitment. So he was very serious about it. But the truth is, in most of my collaborations or hirings, I've not really done this. Actually, one of the exceptions is, as you mentioned, when we created this podcast, you and I sat down, and I think probably at your invitation, but also I was very happy to go through this. We really
Yeah.
had several discussions where we talked about what is the sort of editorial.
Mhm.
It wasn't just how do we make money out of this, although we did think about that, but it was more about what's the brand, the look and feel. What are we not
Mhm.
going to do? How do we want our podcast to stand out amongst other things?
Mhm.
And we made several decisions that I think have really been very clear guidelines for us for the last couple of years. So
Mhm.
that's an example of how it should be done. And I think actually quite rare. And so there's a lot of
Yeah.
easy wins there if you actually remember to do it, I think.
And I think with a team approach, you've got an opportunity when new team members come in, because usually what we're doing as team builders is we're looking for someone to fill a role in an area of the business that is deficient or not being managed, or we're doing ourselves and we know we're doing it ineffectively, and we want somebody to come alongside. That's a common situation many entrepreneurs find themselves in, and I think it's in that situation you have a perfect setup to say to the new person, if you've hired them well, hey, you're the expert in this space. We're not doing it well right now. Let's co-create this idea of how this should be done. Give us your best learnings and lessons from your prior work experience and your ideas. Let us explain from our side how things work in our business right now. And let's co-create a plan that goes forward that you can execute on. It's really a perfect setup for that idea of having them be highly invested in the vision because they've helped create it. And as entrepreneurs, we can do that over and over and over as we scale up our business. And I think there's a lot of just very simple logic that you can apply there,
Hmm.
as opposed to saying to someone something along the lines of, I'm no expert and we're managing this horribly right now. Nonetheless, let me tell you exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
I think
So,
this is a very good point, and this I just want to put another nuance into this point because I think it depends who you're hiring. If you're hiring, for example, I've got a graphic designer that works very very part time with me, but she knows me and the brand by now, and she's an expert in graphic design. So if I bring her in, I expect her to be much better at graphic design than me. Whereas I've just hired somebody to be a virtual assistant and sort of blended role of different things. One of which there's another point here. It sort of grew out of his resume because I've been wanting to develop some outbound marketing efforts for about a year and a half and just thought I've never got around to it. He has some outbound marketing experience, but he did make the point, which is entirely valid, that he said, well, look, I will need a structure, or he put it more or less this way, which was good managing up even in the hiring interview, which is one reason I hired him. So in other words, he was making the point gently and diplomatically, but firmly, that it's up to me as the manager to manage it, because I'm not hiring him with a pre-existing skill set as somebody who's got loads of expertise. I'm hiring somebody who has a certain amount of experience in that area, but was not in a managerial role, if you see what I mean. So I think there are different levels of appropriateness of how much leadership from you people expect versus how much is a co-creation in the purest sense, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, totally agree. Sure. Yeah. Love it.
So then the other question, I guess, less extreme than the when people are behaving just badly or incompetently, when it's
Mhm.
going okay, but people aren't really buying into your shared vision, how do you address that more subtle situation?
Yeah, yeah. I that's a hard question to answer. I would say there's 3 situations, or three paths that you have to explore when it's just not working. People aren't executing, clearly in the way you had envisioned, and you feel like there's a real misalignment, or even worse, when they're clearly executing with their own intention and their own vision that's contrary to what you wanted to see happen. Um, there's 3 things that are happening there. One is you've badly explained the vision, or it hasn't been co-created in such a way that, they've clearly not understood it, and maybe the fault is with you, as we've talked about. Second, so that's one thing. Second thing could be that they just aren't the right people, and they're clearly not going to work with you in a way that's co-creative and executing against the same plan or vision. So that's the reality. They might just be a bad fit. And but the third thing is the harder one, and that's that you might just be going through the the kind of the what people call the forming, storming, and norming kind of team building process, where they're new, you're new to working with them, they're not quite dialed in yet, and you have to go through this rocky patch where first you form as a group, and then you storm, kind of chaos or whatever, and then you get into the normal routine, and you have to evaluate whether that's what's happening or not, and if it is, where you're at in that cycle, and how do you get through that patch where you find your sea legs, I guess, if you're on a boat together, and you can really start to work effectively together. That's a really, really common scenario, and so I think it's a hard thing for us to know as one of the leaders is, am I in that period with someone, and can we make this work? Or is this the sign that they're just not the right person? Or again, the sign that maybe I haven't communicated effectively?
Yeah, these are very, very thoughtful responses to the situation. I think often the default response is, "I've hired an idiot. How could he possibly not get it?" And then to just fire. There's a phrase which I think in America is very popular, which is "hire slowly, fire quickly." And I'm not really convinced that's always the case. I mean, I don't think you should let somebody hang on longer than you intuitively know. Genuinely, this ain't working. But I think you're right that there is a period. There's a little bit of a honeymoon period, and then there's the reality of the difficulties, and you need to
Hmm.
I guess your judgment probably just gets better over time with telling the difference between this is just teething problems and versus this ain't going to work, is it? I think that's
Yeah, yeah. Teething problems, I guess, is a good way to
yeah.
phrase it. Yeah. So it is hard to know, and I think over time you just get better at realizing you give it your best. You figure out over time with experience how best to approach people.
Hmm.
And then but sometimes you still get surprised. And
Yeah.
sometimes you get surprised by your own behavior and your own insecurity or limitations, and sometimes you get surprised by other people's.
Yeah.
And so the dose of humility, I think, is important there. But those are the crossroads you're at, Is it them? Is it you?
Yeah.
Or is it just normal, and you'll work through it together?
Just a couple of responses to your other points as well. The vision's bad or badly explained. I mean, I think it's extremely common to have not so much a bad vision as to have really an absence of one. You think you've got a vision, but it's very unfocused and vague. And by the way, I interview, obviously tons and tons of e-commerce entrepreneurs and SaaS and agency owners, and most of them, I simply say, I'm not trying to test them, but it's a real acid test over time. I've noticed. I say, so in one sentence, so I can introduce you cleanly for the podcast. What does your business do? and then they come out with corporate stuff, or they come out with something that's way too long and vague. And that's
Yeah.
a real test. If you can't explain what
Yeah.
your business does in a sentence to a stranger, then you may have an issue. And that's okay to go through those phases. Sometimes a coach can really help with that, or a branding expert if you really want to go deep diving. But I think having gone through a process like that before you talk to your team, or if it's not looking clear, to reiterate, maybe privately talk with a coach, or a fellow entrepreneur who's not involved in your business, and then go back and try and re-articulate, that can help, I think. And then at that point, you may need to give the employee, as you said earlier, more or less, or implied, the
Yeah.
option that this is not what you thought it was, and you may need to give them the option to say, this is not what I thought it was. It's not what I want to stick around for,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that happens as I've worked with people now for what, 3.5, 4 years, one-on-one coaching. I
Hmm.
think that happens, what you just described,
Hmm.
because people see trainings about business models and then they say to themselves, that's a business model I could take off the shelf from this guru or expert, and I could install into my life, my situation, my circumstance. And therefore, I'm now operating a business model that got told to me or explained to me or taught to me. And but usually they've tacked that onto other things and slices of other ideas, and maybe a Franken business has been created. And sometimes you see that and hear that in people when you ask them those kinds of details, and you realize they haven't really spent enough time with their baby to really realize, how do I talk about this, explain it, grow it, and manage it. And sometimes they're big. Sometimes they've had seven-figure successes that have popped. And so it's not as if they haven't been successful, but they've still maybe not really fully stewed on their business model. And some of that's just a function of time. After running the same business model for over a decade, I can tell you we've thought a lot about it. But when you're only, 12 months into it, or, 18 months into it, you still have fuzziness
Yeah.
around what you're doing. And that's par for the course. So
It is. I think it is par for the course, but I think also when you get to certain inflection points, if you hire a coach for the first time, if you hire a person you're paying for the first time, what it does is force you to articulate things. And when you try and articulate things, sometimes you realize you have no flipping idea. Like I had, in terms of horror stories, I had a really, I thought I was quite proud of myself. I stayed up to 4 in the morning one day, just working on, and that's not what I'm proud of myself, but was working on really structured interview questions. I had my outgoing assistant, who's fantastic, um, part of the interview process, and we had a chat, a debrief afterwards. And I thought, oh wow, that was so much better than 2 years ago. But then I was trying to explain some of the sort of outbound sales ideas to this guy in a second interview, where I was going to discuss fees and stuff, and it was all over the map. And I think um, that was part of a rather painful and rather embarrassing way of me realizing that I have not formed my thoughts at all around the sales thing. And that's okay, but it showed me where I'm at. I thought I was kind of mentally clocking myself as I'm sort of 4 out of 10 for clarity, but I was about 1.5 out of 10. And that's okay, because now I need
yeah,
to go away and really train myself, take trainings, listen to podcasts, write things out, run it past cleverer friends, maybe including yourself, and then write it down. And
yeah,
there's various processes that need to happen, and sometimes you don't know you're not there until you try and explain it. So it's part of the
yeah.
humility piece again, isn't it, really?
Well, the scarier point is, if you can't effectively communicate your vision to your employees and paid team members, how in the world can you communicate it to the world and
100%.
to your
Yes.
customers?
You're absolutely right.
So,
Yeah. So I
so
guess
yeah,
embarrassment in the hiring interviews is it can be quite embarrassing, because it's a one to
yeah,
one, and they're kind of looking you for leadership, because that's your
hmm,
job, literally, and you're not
yeah,
able to provide it at that point. But as you say, the people out there who don't ever talk to you, don't send you emails, and don't give you rude reviews on Amazon or anything else, are just
yeah,
simply not buying your product or service because they're
yeah,
confused. And you're right, it's a really great reality check that could
yeah.
actually help you make a lot more money once you've got it nailed down, I think.
And I'm not saying I'm good at this, but I'll just tell you one example, for because of a deficit I saw in our own business, Kyle and I's business, and that's that, we have 3 or 4 or 5 things that we do, and we can communicate about any one of them at any given time. And I realized that it could be very disorienting to our, email list, subscribers or whatever. So I just wrote something probably 9 months ago or so that I have at the bottom of our email that goes out every week. And it's just called The Company We're Building to Serve You. And it has the four buckets activity that we are building or running, and in every newsletter. And I just keep it in there because as people join our list, maybe they've joined because we've done a special event. They get on our list and they're like, I didn't know you had a SaaS software, set of tools. Or maybe they joined because they had the SaaS software set of tools and they said, I didn't know you had group coaching or a group thing. And so, my thinking was I'll just say exactly the company we're building to serve them in every newsletter. So there's no ambiguity. And hopefully that helps people be oriented to what we call our SaaS plus model, which is software plus education consulting
Hmm.
and done for you services, which is a mouthful. I mean, I just
Yeah.
even saying it right there is like, what
Yeah.
now? What all do
Yeah.
you do?
I
So
think I
yeah,
think you're right, and the more complex you're offering, I mean, what you're offering as a sort of package totally makes sense to the sort of progression possibilities, their expansion possibilities for your clients. So it will really serve them better, as well as giving you a chance to monetize relationships better and all the rest of it. But it is quite a strategic way of thinking, and therefore it's not quick and easy to communicate. So I think you're absolutely right. The more complicated your offering is, the more clarity you have to have with everyone, and that
yeah.
includes marketing. But it very much another way of putting it, and I thought this as well, but is recruitment is a marketing function. In other
Mhm.
words, you need to attract, sell into a vision, and then keep sold into and deepen that connection with vision of your employees or contractors or team members, whatever we're calling them. Um, and yeah, that's sometimes something. Sometimes people do nail the marketing messaging externally, but they don't really communicate that internally. And I think that's another disconnect that you can
Yeah.
see, right? And less
Yeah.
common, but it's still there, I think.
Yeah, and obviously we're applying all of these conversational components to the e-commerce business, kitchen table entrepreneur, and people who are scaling up companies and teams in the e-commerce space. But this is all true, and with my other hats on, I think about how this applies to our charity,
Hmm.
where we have volunteers all around the world, and we have a team in Zambia of 63 people. We wrote a book again 2016 initially, and then we released it in 2019 to early 2020, and it's called We Are So Powerful. And it's our story, but it's also the whole middle of the book is about 50 stories of our volunteers and their expression of collaboration and partnership with our charity. And we're reworking that book right now for the third edition. And that to me is the central content of that book is their stories. And when you hear them explain their vision and their story related to what the organization that you're running and working on, it's very, very fascinating because you hear people articulate things back to you that sometimes it's what you had said, sometimes it's what they heard, sometimes it's what you emphasize, sometimes it's something you casually mentioned, but it's a way in which you hear them re-articulate a shared vision, and it's just fascinating. And it makes you realize that communication is incredibly challenging, but when done well or when worked on, it can be incredibly powerful as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what you said, a couple of fascinating things. And by the way, all these things you get to communicate internally, but I think our prospects and clients or customers are also thinking similar things, but we often never hear from them.
Hmm.
And that is the feature you thought was just a little extra for somebody can be the single most important thing for them.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yep.
a way of putting things that you hadn't thought that much about, but you had to put a little bit of thought was really emotionally important to them. So those are two sort of
Hmm.
responses that I think are quite typical. And it's a
Yep.
reminder that communication, there's all sorts of academic theories, right? But it's not just what you say, the broadcast bit, it's what's received is often
Hmm.
violently different, like
Hmm.
completely different. And we're talking even
Yeah.
native language speakers.
Yeah.
It can really be different. Husbands and wives are a famous place where that can happen, but also within a team. And it's good, again, to the humility point. If you've got the patience to explore, when I said X, what did you understand by that?
Hmm.
And listen to the answer. And instead of telling them off, because that will not induce future content communication. And I have to restrain myself there. And I'd think, oh, okay, so what I meant was Z. And then, you can correct course. So to the point of, is this just forming, storming, or norming? I think you can't really tell if you haven't put proper communications in and at least check things. You can't really tell yet whether they're the right fit or whether it's just terrible management. And I would say that having frequent meeting rhythms is really something I've been naturally weak on, and I'm really trying to get myself back on track with that, because I think without that,
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the right to expect to earn. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about so much, a small collaboration, like if I hire somebody off Fiverr or a one-off project for a little bit of graphic design work. But if I've got a regular employee, or it's a big project like a website redesign, if I don't make time for regular meetings, even if theoretically you've communicated the facts, that contact isn't there, the top of mindness of you and your project isn't there, the connection isn't there. And my experience is, particularly with remote working, that I think I need to default to more meetings is better than too few, if I'm going to err on the side these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the frequency of communication is a key part of getting the vision clear in both parties' minds, all parties'
Mhm.
minds. Yeah, absolutely. All right, man, we better wrap up the show. My internet has decided to quit on me here. So, you want to wrap it up here? You want me to? What do you want to do?
Yeah, why don't you just summarize your thoughts? So it's mostly been your sort of stuff on the shared vision. Why don't you summarize what we've got today?
Yep, happy to do it. So, bottom line, creating a shared vision looks like casting, whether it's co created with the person you're working with as a team or a group together, casting something effective that's strategic, logical, inspiring, mutually beneficial, and achievable. The acronym SLIMA, which I know is going to be super popular, it's going to trend on Twitter. So, just remember to tag me when that happens. And we really, really encourage you to think about whether your vision is being co-created and effectively communicated. And hopefully, this conversation has helped make that a reality for you. So there you have it, a little bit of best practice and tips for how to create a shared vision.
Really like this stuff, man. It's a great topic, under discussed, I think, compared to how impactful it is. So hopefully, those who are listening will find the same. Thanks so much if you've joined us live today, and don't forget to put your comments and questions. We'll look at them after the show as well, I promise. And the other thing, of course, is that all of this is being put through all the podcast channels, usual places. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying this, so that you get regular content. If you can give us a rating out of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, that's always really, really helpful. And also in the call-in app these days, a very cutting-edge bit of technology that we're on every Tuesday. I'm just trying to think of the time zone conversion. So it's 8 a.m. Pacific, 11
Hmm.
a.m. Eastern, and 4 p.m.
Hmm.
UK time, or 5 p.m. Central European time. So come and join us there for our hot takes with Chris Green and Kyle Hamer as well. So lots of places you can reach us. It's all exciting stuff. We're spreading the word, the best business practice. And Jason, as always, just want to finish by saying it's just such a privilege to talk to somebody who thinks things through at this level, and I think that's going to help everybody's run their businesses that much more effectively as well.
Thank you, man. Great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Okay, that's the podcast, friends. Thanks for hanging out with us live and or watching the replay on YouTube and the Facebook groups or wherever. If you have questions about the topic, of course, feel free to throw them into the comment section. As always, Michael, it really is cool. My internet really is glitching out on me, so I'm not sure this is effective here, but sorry for that. California apparently doesn't have good quality internet. Just joking. No. Okay, cool. Any final
Thanks, man.
comments for the team, for the group?
No, thank you very much for listening, folks.
Yeah,
As ever, it's always a privilege to try and move people's businesses forward.
awesome. Okay, bye, everybody.